Hello and welcome back to Anne on Influence, brought to you by theSALT, the first to market nano influencer channel in South Africa as part of South Africa's #1 influencer marketing group, Nfinity. I'm Anne Sheikh and we have another great marketer chatting to us in this episode. Today we're in conversation with Lesley-Ann Gallant, Digital Marketing Manager at Sanlam Credit Solutions. She is an incredibly passionate digital marketer, and you will hear this come through in this episode. At Sanlam, Lesley-Ann is the strategic lead in planning and executing targeted data-driven acquisition campaigns that convert high-intent audiences into product sales. In general, she loves optimizing e-commerce businesses and improving their online performance and seeing their conversion rates go up. We chat about using influencers in the financial industry and why it's become so popular, the 3 big things that influencer marketing impacts on businesses and brands, the power of shifting financial education to social media for more accessibility, and the big shifts in influencer marketing overall. Enjoy. If you enjoy listening to Anne on Influence and find it insightful or helpful or educational, you will also enjoy our fortnightly newsletter. Sign up at the link in our show notes.
This podcast series has been made possible through an exclusive sponsorship from SA's #1 nano influencer platform, theSALT. Most brands have a communication line to their existing customers, but not a way to get them to have additional positive brand conversations. theSALT solves the problem by identifying brand fans and getting them to talk more about their positive brand experiences. theSALT have a database of over 140,000 registered brand fans and in-depth information on each to perfectly match your brand to the right influencers. Reach out to them now and see what they can do for you.
Good day, Lesley-Ann. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you making time for us. But before we get into this, we all know who you are now. I'm just always really interested on how people actually find their way into being a digital marketer. So what's your story?
A really interesting conversation, and it didn't happen so long ago. But I've always been into marketing, mostly because of the storytelling behind marketing. And where I started with marketing and sales. I was in sales rep and worked at like a hydro saturation building systems. I've started in sales and all over. And then I broke away from that and had a break and started at back in the day, website or directories used to be quite big. Like that was very powerful. You had a directory listing a different, whether it was services or shops. And one of their places was Cape Town Kids. And it was a website directory for families on family events and places to stay and family-friendly events. And I first experienced holistic campaigns because back in the day, you just used to post in your directory. But what we decided and what we discovered was the power of social media and holistic campaigns. So that push and pull process that you use within digital, pushing it from social media to your platform and back. And the power then drove and impacted that entire business and directly to grow to a place that was just became so exciting. And that's how I ended up in digital marketing. I've just grown from there, from a website directory in WordPress.
That's so interesting because we all have like a story of where you just kind of fell into it and you realize there's this thing called social media and you can actually do amazing things with it. And here we are. We're all marketers now online. I love it.
It's great. And it literally all started with like stories and like blogging. I remember everybody had a little small blog post and a Facebook account. It was MySpace back in the day as well. And it started there really.
Oh, no, very interesting. So we're obviously today talking about specifically influencer marketing. And I really just want to know, and I ask every single guest this question is, when was your first experience of influencer marketing in your career? What did that look like? When was it? And what did you really want to achieve with it?
So my first experience, I think, was in 2018. And back then, ad ops managers still sold advertising space based on like impressions and circulation. very similar to how they would have sold space in magazines or your traditional media space. And I worked in an agency, and we ran a campaign called Braille Score. The campaign mechanics was a little bit hard to execute. So, in social media or in any campaign, to drive entries, you need to be able to display or illustrate the mechanics. And so Braille Score was quite tricky in that you had to Braille Score predicting what South Africa would do or how they would perform in the games within the World Cup. I think it was a World Cup, some rugby tournament. And that's a little bit that's a bit difficult to illustrate and demonstrate to drive entries. And initially we were going to put down banner displays on top, like websites, to drive awareness. But previously, I've learned very quickly that having that form of advertising doesn't necessarily impact entries. It will drive awareness, but not drive or encourage actual action or performance. And so that's when it was actually with theSALT. I remember the two ladies that I spoke to for the first time, and they presented this influencer campaign. And I thought, oh my word, so different. It was 2018. I never heard of it before. Like I said, we were still buying advertising space in the form of like banner ads and things like that. And that was the first time I embarked on using influencers, nano influencers. They drove the campaign by demonstrating and illustrating how to enter the campaign. And of course, they got excited because we didn't exclude them from winning or being part of it or being in the entry to win the competition or to win prizes within. So the nanos were part of the competition as well, so they could do it for themselves. But then what we noticed was because of, and again, the algorithm literally plays in to how those things pick up speed because then of the engagement, more awareness. And we saw the amount of entries more than double from the previous year, based on the fact that's excluding the influencers that participated. So they really drove that engagement that we were looking for, especially within a campaign that had such a tricky mechanic.
That's amazing. And I'm very impressed. I think you're the first guest who's ever said that your first encounter with influencer marketing was with nano influencers. Usually it is some big celeb that someone booked for a campaign, and you literally used real people off the bat, which means you were way ahead of your time. Yeah.
It was incredible. It never left me. It formed the basis of a lot of my campaigns and understanding. And that time we didn't have the paid media backing towards it, so it was organically done. But the algorithms were also different, so it allowed for organic engagement and growth and reach. But the nanos really, because it was exciting for. Today we brand with your friends, and next week they were their family, and so it became quite exciting. And we could definitely see everyday real people drive it. It was fantastic.
So then what is your kind of experience, or what you're thinking of the more macro influences, especially in today's world, where nanos obviously, because they're real people, they're super relatable, they're people that we know. So they obviously have a little bit more influence of us. But what do you think about the macro influences? Do you think there's still a space for them in influence marketing?
I think there'll always be space for your celebs and your macros. I believe that there's always space because there's always room for aspirations and you're always dreaming. I think that's what our human nature enjoys, is aspiring to achieve more, to be more, to live differently. And I believe the macros have that sort of influence to play in that space because they have that reach and they have the impact. I think when you use different size influences from celeb to macro to nano, ultimately depends on your campaign objective and what it is that you're wanting to achieve. I think the best, if I had to advise on a campaign, I think the best is always to have a mix of macros and nanos to support it. So, for instance, if you have a macro that's well known within the sports industry, for instance, then your nanos would almost be the natural fans of that macro influencer or similar to them. And I think that is when you carry quite a bit of weight in your campaign because you're feeding it from all levels. So, yes, I definitely think that there is still space. I do think, though, that regardless of celeb, macro, micro, nanos, I think the power in it is the authenticity of those influencers. I think that your profile holds credibility if you are authentic about the campaign, if you believe in it, if it's something that you would naturally involve yourself with, or services that you would try, or products that you would consume yourself, because that holds authenticity. And I think back to holding your true north, because you can be involved in anything, but being aware of that influence, it's best to be authentic in the campaigns that you involve yourself. And that's where the power lies. If you're just going to take any campaigns willy-nilly and whatever everybody's throwing at you because you're the hot person at the time, your audience wouldn't know who or what you stand for. And then that's when you lose your power.
I 100% agree with you. And I loved all the points you just said, because I'm always preaching that as well. Mix is always great because you get the real people who's actually interested in the product or the service. They're already spending their money on it. They're fans. And then your big guys have such a big place still, just for that mass awareness, mass reach. And people still want that aspiration. So 100% agree with that.
And they drive the sentiment.
I agree.
They drive sentiment and positioning of your brand or campaign.
So, Lesley-Ann, in your opinion, what do you think has been the biggest changes that we've seen in the influence marketing industry over the last, say, 2 years? Because a lot's been happening.
So much. Like, if you look back where I started and where we are, it's just a whole new, exploding industry. Big changes, the power and the awareness of nano influencers. And I think it's basically going back to the marketing of word of mouth. I think we're going right back to the fundamentals and the power of word of mouth. And we've just seen that in the digital space explode. And then, of course, the paid media supporting our campaigns. I think that's really powerful because previously you would run your own paid media campaigns with the same with targeting and how you would run paid media performance and optimize campaigns. Now you can actually back your influencer content as well. And if you've got the right targeting and data points, then that means you have more impact and power of who you're influencing, who you're wanting that engagement from. So I feel like it's really what happened in industry now is we've now just been a little bit closer to the bullseye. You can go straight to your target. And I think that's very powerful. And again, I think because it's so powerful to be aware and conscious of the campaigns that you're driving has become, again, an absolute pivotal point to drive what you're involved in, because that's how targeted and influential we can be with our campaigns. I think that's been the two big prominent features.
100%. And I think it's just going to keep on evolving. That target is just going to get smaller and smaller, and we're just going to be able to hit it every time. But to your point, it's very, very important to make sure that the campaigns you're running is for good because people do get influenced by all kinds of things, especially online. So Lesley-Ann, a couple of years ago, it was completely unheard of to have influence marketing play in the financial industry. And we've just seen it pop up more and more and more. Finance, insurance, they've also now started doing influencer marketing. Why do you think this is all of a sudden something that's kind of grown popularity in that space?
Well, I think two things. I don't think that it's never been. I mean, there are a number of financial institutions that would have held like events where you would have pop or well-known artists present, and so there's already affiliation to grow the brand in that sort of way, with through the events and experiences. I think what has changed is how consumers, for lack of a better word, but how consumers engage with brands and consume information. So that's more prominent to first have an experience with a brand or a person online than you would at an event or in person. And I think that's become prominent because the way users behave and potential consumers and leads engage with products and services starts with the comfort of their own homes with or wherever they are via their devices. And so that's where they're being influenced mostly or first. So that's the first touch point. And I think what financial industries have learned, and we certainly have seen, is again the power of word of mouth. So back in the day, when you would be talking to your neighbor or your friend about financial advice, or you've heard this, or you experienced this, that would have happened over the fence or at the kitchen table or at a restaurant, wherever you were hanging with your friends, and it starts out, and then you'll be handed over a card, or get in touch with this person, or you see it, and then later on you'll see an ad in a newspaper. Now you're getting the same word of mouth or experiences from your connections or from your social media network, and how they are consuming their information through that social media space. And I feel like financial industries are tapping into that consumer behavior now. And that's what's changing in the financial industry. It's meeting your consumers where they are.
No, absolutely. And we're just seeing it so often now. And I'm like, I was so surprised, because you wouldn't think that a financial product or service would translate well into a social media post. But funny enough, it does. And I think, to your point earlier, it's all about that storytelling. Like, if you have someone who had been using your product for a while, they will have a couple of stories, good or bad. We're hoping we get the good ones that they will relate to their family and friends and their online connections, who will then hopefully be curious and ask more questions and actually check that out at the end of the day. And that makes me also wonder, we've spoken about macro and nano earlier, and I think we all agree that there's space for all kinds of influencers. But for this type of content, especially when you speak to finance, what kind of content and also what kind of tier of influencer do you think works best to actually get that message across, that word of mouth?
Again, I think it depends on the campaign and the campaign objectives. So, for instance, if it's in a brand awareness or launching of a brand product where your primary objective is to create that awareness, then influencers with a larger reach and always with a high engagement rate is crucial. But I go back to the initial point, a mix of your micro, macros, and your nanos is pivotal, because then you've got the awareness and you almost have the nanos speaking to the experience from a ordinary person's point of view and experience. And I think that then holds a great weighting, especially to meet your objectives. With every campaign will be different objectives and metrics. So, and then your choice of influencers and what they are required to do will be based on those objectives and metrics.
For sure. And I also think, with paid media being so targeted and so effective these days, we don't really need people with massive reach, because we will get that through our targeting. It all depends on your budget and, again, your objectives, what you want to drive there.
That's right. So we ran a campaigns where we had always on influencers to speak and to grow, and that with your paid media drives that awareness and that reach. And because you're speaking to a specific persona or a nano based on their data points, you then can reach the right audience to drive those metrics. So I think it's always, you're right, you don't need the bigger guys, but then for positioning of to get the idea of what your brand or what your campaign feels like, those guys I think do a really great job to position that look and feel of your campaign, and it gives it that little bit. But essentially it's always the nanos, because you trust your friend or the person next door much more than a someone that you've seen in a magazine, or that you know of, but you don't know them.
No, for sure. And I think this macro and celebrities also just give a bit of pizzazz to something. And, like you were saying earlier, if you align kind of the right macro or celeb with your brand, it can do wonders, because it is that aspirational aspect as well, that people do still look for.
Oh, that's right. And I think that's always what marketing does. Marketing and branding gives that edge to a product, so that it becomes tangible what this intangible asset is. You can't tell what a brand looks and feels like, only through experience. And I think they do a really great job positioning that message.
#NoFilter. That's how this podcast is delivering real down-to-earth stories told by real people. For an influencer campaign that takes brand conversation to everyday real-life situations, go check out theSALT.co.za. They are the undisputed experts in real influencer marketing.
No, that they do. I think they're experts in that. That's why they are the macros.
That's right. Correct. But again, like I feel your campaign's weight and their clout is driven by your everyday people. And the mix is, once you've got the right mix, you've got a winning formula.
I agree. So then obviously you're quite a fan of influencer marketing. You've been a digital marketer for quite a while. What do you think is the 3 biggest benefits of any brand tapping into influencer marketing?
Well, one of it, and the success, is the impact and engagement that you can drive and tap into a targeted audience. And I think that plays really well into how algorithms work, because if you've got 10 people going and talking about the same thing within a sort of a field, then that gives that content extra weight, and the algorithm then pushes it. So for the brand, that translates into a very cost-effective method to get your message or your campaign across. 2, brands always, I think, one of the impacts to drive a success, that measures a successful brand, is what people say about them, and how many people are saying things about them. So your sentiment of the brand and that chatter. And I've seen influencer campaigns, specifically when you use a squad of nanos, how it has a direct impact on the sentiment of a brand. And that then does translate, whether it's immediate or further down the line, into sales or leads for the business to generate. So it influences, you impact a cost-effective method of driving your message. 2, you then have impact on your brand sentiment and chatter. So that grows, and then that results or generates into leads or sales. I think those are the 3 big things that influencer marketing impacts and benefits brands or businesses.
Those are 3 really big things that I feel like not all brands always think about. I think there's some marketers that still think influencers are only there for awareness, but it's so much more than that.
Oh no, definitely. I've seen how deep campaigns can impact your leads generation. And again, it depends on having a clear campaign objective and metric set. Without that, I think, yes, it would be for awareness, but you can create a full holistic 360 campaign that involves and hits all of those targets and objectives. And I've seen it happen. And because, when something happens recurringly, then it's not a strike of luck. It's actually science behind it. And I believe in it. I've seen the power of it. And because of the power, you be aware of the campaigns that you ran, because you have great impact. That has phenomenal impact on your business.
I think you just mentioned something so important, is that you can't go into a campaign without having clear objectives, because then for me, it's like, how did you even plan, or how did you make a strategy around that? Because then it's just, for me, it's like a throwaway tactic. Oh, let's just get someone online to talk about it. But if you're not measuring it, I wouldn't recommend.
No, it's so risky to not, and I think that's the exciting part about digital marketing, is that you can measure it and you can measure the impact, and that's the return on investment of your campaigns. Traditionally, if it was an ad on TV flighted, you could do a little bit of like an overlaying, but actual direct results is a little bit more of a guess or assumptions than the digital marketing space, where you can see your impact and the performance of your media spend. So yes, those metrics are.
100%. That's why I also love it. There's no guesswork.
There isn't. No, once you hit that science, and once you understand, firstly, like you said, the strategy and how the dots connect, you have measurements in place, and it's like events firing well, but if it's not firing there, you know that needs to be optimized, and you can see it fitting through. And I absolutely love that, because it's like a game that you to the next level. On every level, you're just optimizing what you're doing. Suppose that goes down to those days of TV games, Super Mario Brothers, when you're collecting your coins. It feels like that. So, yes, that's the exciting part about digital marketing. And influencers, or is not just the awareness channel. It's a powerful method that can be integrated with all your other channels to create an impactful campaign. And that's regardless of the campaign messaging. I mean, I've seen it when you have to apply your score, which is incredibly difficult mechanic, but you can see the influence on it. And if you've layered all of your channels and integrated them holistically, then that means you hit right down the funnel, from awareness down into engagement to the do phase. And you can go right as far as retention, because once you've built your base, you then keep bringing them back and they re-engage. And that also then becomes cheaper or more cost effective, because you have a returning audience.
For sure. And I also love that you speak about influencer marketing as part of a holistic campaign and not always a standalone, because I do think there's so much power in it obviously being a standalone. But once you plug it into all your other marketing activities, boy, oh boy, then you really, really see the power of everything working together.
That's exactly that. Like, you wouldn't have your social media campaign running separately to your traditional space or from your paid or your Google paid ads. They run together. And integration, that's your winning formula.
So what advantages have you found outsourcing your influencer marketing campaigns to specialist agencies? Because we know a lot of people try doing it on their own. It's really a headache. They don't have the relationships. They're always going back and forth with fees and deliverables. But we all know there's actual agencies this is all they do. They live and breathe it. So they're really good at it.
Yes, the headache. I think there's so many benefits. One of it is just to take that headache away. I think people can be difficult, and it requires negotiations and understanding who you matching the brand to your influencer. That is in itself, it's quite a difficult feat. So the specialists match your data points of your campaign or your brand to the ideal influencer. And if you just look at the social media space, you can tell how many users there are. So to scroll the web looking for your ideal influencer is incredibly time consuming. And then negotiating their costs is also just a nightmare that I'm happy to avoid. And managing that relationship is incredibly difficult and time consuming because relationships require time. And in a digital marketing space, you've got, like I said, it's one of the channels integrated into a campaign. So to not have to deal, and you don't want to make people feel like they're just a number. And I think that's where the specialist agencies really excel at, is building those relationships with the influencers on your behalf. And that takes a weight off my shoulders. And then, of course, matching those data points is, that the people that you briefed in and the influencers propose match the data points. And data points are not just demographics data points, but data points with regards to their followers and their engagement, because there's bots around, so things that you can't see with the naked eye anymore. And I feel like that's where the specialist agencies really tap into. So you get the extent of knowing that you're working with credible influencers and at a cost-effective, time-efficient space. And that's what I love about it. And I wouldn't take it in-house. No, that's a headache.
I love all those points because they're so, I think, relatable to every marketer. You've got so many things going that really spending your time chasing down an influencer shouldn't be one of your headaches. 100%.
No, no. Especially when you're running a campaign. I just thought of imagined it. No. Especially when you're running a campaign with with a large squad of influencers. At any given time, if you're running with like 20 people, imagine thank you. Yeah. Oh, no, I just thought of chasing 20 people.
No, we don't have time for that. Sorry. So that's actually brought us to the end of our conversation, Lesley-Ann. Thank you so much for joining us. But before you go, I would love for you to just give us a couple of learnings that you have gathered since your first campaign experience in 2018 to where you're now, where other people can kind of learn from you and not make the same mistakes.
So there's been a few. The game changed really quickly, so there's been constant learnings. A big part of that is when you do select your influencers or knowing the campaign. So first keeping that campaign and making sure that you're aligned from an integrity point of view and that you authentically support it. Because you have great influence over many people, and the ripple effect of what you do really extends far and wide. And then also taking that same thinking and same integrity when you view the influencers and their content. So making sure that who you're partnering with is aligned to the campaign and the brand authentically in their own space. That means taking time to also just view their own profiles, just because they're hot in one industry doesn't mean it's suitable for your brand or campaign. And I think that makes your content credible, and it's very important for us digital marketers to remain authentic, credible, and credible in the space where we have such great impact. And my learnings from that is when you don't, and luckily, touch wood, that it hasn't happened in our campaigns, but I've seen it happen in other brand campaigns where consumers are aware of the misalignment, and then that causes a lot of negative chatter and sentiment because the influencer doesn't authentically meet the brand campaign or messaging. And that causes a lot of trouble for the influencer themselves, and as well as the brand. And that's a learning that I'm glad I've witnessed from afar and not something that I've needed to think this experience myself. And I think that's the biggest lesson, especially in this space.
For me, then I've also seen that happen and always been so thankful that I wasn't involved in those campaigns, because everyone's like, oh, they trended. And you're like, for all the wrong reasons. You don't want that.
Can happen so quickly, and every day we play in this space, say a silent prayer.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so I think not me. And I think that if digital marketers are aware of the impact and remain credible with integrity in the campaigns that they run and who they speak with and the influence they use, and influencers remain authentic and credible with integrity in the campaigns that they select and choose, we can really change and shift the narrative. And also from an educational space, you can really drive. You have so much influence and impact on the environment that you work in. So yeah, I think that's the lesson. Like, stay true. That's so cheesy. But yes.
It's not, because I think those are fantastic learnings. I think sometimes when you're so caught up in your brand, your campaigns, you don't always think about those things. And you need to take that step back and, like you say, do your due diligence. Yes, we've selected these amazing influencers for you, but it's also up to you to ultimately go through their profile, because you know your brand better than anyone else. To go, you know what, actually, a post they did 2 years ago doesn't really align with us. Because also digital, we've seen those tweets. It's like, so, oh, I found this tweet from 4 years ago, this person, and now they're aligned with this brand. And now you have to do crisis comms. Can you please avoid that? So if you can avoid those things.
Yeah. And I think for the influence as well, it's important that you're aware of what you're posting in every sense of the word.
Absolutely.
That also does influence it. It's basically our online CV now. It's a walking, talking CV. Very different to where we were years ago. I think that's also from where I started to where we are. It's a different beast. I mean, we've all said and done some strange things years ago. Now it's online, and so we do need to be cognizant of those times when we're popping bottles.
No, you're right. The first thing when you meet someone new is it used to be to Google them. Now it's to go on Instagram and or Facebook to find them and see what they actually talk about. And then you go like, oh, this person's opinion's not for me, eh? Let's move along. Or, you know what, we've got very similar interests. We're going to be great friends.
It's crazy how I wonder, those coaches that taught us back in the day on the first impressions, where it was eye contact and a firm handshake. Like, when in the next few generations it's going to be a strong profile pic, clear bio, is going to be the new eye contact and handshake. More than likely, yes.
I honestly think it's already there, especially on LinkedIn.
Yes, it's
Like, make sure
crazy.
your LinkedIn bios are clear. You utilize the platform quite often, show your expertise. That literally is more than anything at this stage.
It's insane. But I think that from an influencer space, it's that emphasis on keeping up, because keeping up and keeping true becomes a fine line that you can swing, because social media was created to give you that buzz. And being aware of that. And I think that knowing that and being involved in it and knowing how that has ripple effect and insights will guide you. And I think it makes the space very exciting, because so much power and so much good can be done through these mediums. So much forms. I mean, education has already just shifted. Financial education has shifted because of the space. We have access to financial information now that we wouldn't have had years ago. It becomes levels out playing fields all across for generations. And I think that has such power, because shifting financial knowledge, education shifts financial behaviors through literacy, and that changes families and generations. So it's greatly impactful.
Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful thought to end off on. Think about the impact that you cause as a brand and an influencer. Thank you so much, Lesley-Ann, for joining us, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Big pleasure.
This podcast series has been made possible by theSALT, the influencer company that turns influence into affluence. In the same way that information is presented in this podcast in a relatable and authentic way, theSALT gets your customers to tell their real brand stories to their community. Go to thesalt.co.za to learn more about how theSALT can help you grow your business.